think I'm just gonna take one of these out for a spin today instead. That's totally fine, right? I don't think Rick will mind. Hey Rick, if I just take one of the R8s out for a spin today instead of filming, is that cool?
Hey, that's me, Johnny Aperture. You're probably wondering what I'm doing at Auto Engineering.
Yeah, just literally go spin.
That's Rick. He's one of the owners at Auto Engineering.
Or the RS6 outside. There's also an RS6.
And this RS6 is his buddy Mike's.
Mike said that's no problem.
Really?
Yeah, take it on out.
Hey Mike, here's to looking at you, buddy. Alright, let's go find Emil.
But the reason we're here today, Emil, and this yellow M3.
Yo Emil, what are we working on today?
That's Emil. He's AE's BMW Master Tech.
Today we got a pretty special Dakar yellow, E46 M3.
What is it, Dakar yellow?
It's got 120,000 miles on it, so we're doing its first rod bearing job.
Wow.
And not because anything broke or anything happened, it's just we're doing it preventative maintenance.
120,000 though to do rod bearings, is that too late or too little, or what do you think?
It's questionable, you know, it's almost impossible to tell unless you do an oil analysis, every oil change. But this specific car, it's a new car for the owner, so new owner's got no service history, no idea what's going on. So he's doing this just to be smart and safe, and, you know, save his engine from blowing up. So behind me, actually, we got some cool stuff going on. We got pretty lucky today. We've got a spare rotating assembly from another M3.
Cool, man.
So this is basically what we're working with over here. We've got the crankshaft here, got your piston, and we've got your connecting rod.
What does that matter actually? What are these components? I don't even know.
This is your basic fundamentals of internal combustion engines. You have spark and fuel going on in the combustion chamber. That's going to force this piston down. Times by 6, you're going to have this crankshaft start rotating real fast. And then this crankshaft that's connected to your clutch, goes through your transmission, through all your gears, and then eventually all the way to the rear tires and your differential. That's how you get power. This thing's spinning at 8,000 RPM.
Got it.
So with it spinning that fast, you know, obviously you have the need for a bearing, because you have, you know, this is spinning at 8,000 RPMs like this, more or less. So what's going on in there? This is what we got going on in there. Now we've already pulled out a couple of bearings. We've pulled out number 5, we pulled out number 6, and pulled out number 1. Now you can tell we've already got some pretty heavy wear here.
Wow.
So these bearings, they're made primarily of copper, a copper base, with a couple of light coatings of lead and other materials on top. Now as it wears, you know, you're gonna start going through those upper layers. And once you start seeing that copper, that means it's been extremely worn.
Well, hold on, man. I mean, I know that, like, from my M3 when we did it, I mean, I had some copper, but that seems like a lot.
That's a lot. I mean, you can compare it to other ones. So here's number 6 right behind number 5. And this one's not too bad. You can see the color change from how it's gone through a couple different layers already, but it hasn't really reached the copper base yet. I mean, even though you're not seeing copper, these are still extremely worn.
Wow. How close was this car to blowing up? And is that even the right term?
I wouldn't say blowing up. That's probably the worst case scenario. What usually happens with a failed bearing is something called spinning a bearing. And if you want, I can show you what's going on with
Yeah, let's see that.
So, here's another connecting rod. Here are your rod bearings inside. Now this is how it should stay. These bearings stay in place in relation to this connecting rod. And then this bearing surface here, with a thin layer of oil in between, is what's riding on this crankshaft here. Now when you spin a bearing, this bearing shell is actually spinning inside of here. And it's spinning with the crankshaft. So that's not designed to do that. So you're gonna have metal start wearing here. It's gonna wear even quicker and exponentially, and that's where you start getting that clacking noise. So that clacking noise when you hear a spun bearing is more or less like that. Every time this makes a revolution, it's slamming into the connecting rod like that.
And I'm guessing that's not good.
That's not good. It's good for maybe 1 minute and then you're done.
Alright, so those bearings are essential pretty much for this car.
Absolutely essential. With any car. Typically with other cars though, cars with lower RPMs, cars that aren't really designed for track use, high performance, it's really not an issue because the design engineers didn't need to do any of that extra stuff these M3s are doing. because these rev out so high and you're pushing the limits a lot of the time, these clearances are really tight. So BMW made these clearances a little too tight, some would say, and that's why you have to go in here and replace these every, you know, maybe 60 to 100,000 miles. Some people get lucky, they go farther. This one made it all the way to 120. You know, they're obviously worn, nothing happened. There's no damage inside the engine, but he was certainly very close. So a lot of people ask me, you know, how can I extend the life of my bearings? Maybe I don't want to do them every 60,000 miles. Really, the best thing you can do is frequent oil changes, and I'll show you here. You know, we've got a brand new crankshaft here. You can see the color of it, nice and clean. Come over to the car we're working on with 120,000 miles. You can tell how dirty it is in here, how unfrequent the oil changes have been. Now, why is that important for bearing life? Well, as you know, the motor runs and, you know, does its thing, the motor's naturally going to wear. Metal's going to come off. It's all part of the natural process. But those metals are like abrasives. So when they get stuck in those bearings and you don't change your oil frequent enough, that gets embedded in the bearings, starts wearing. So the best thing you can really do is just change your oil frequently. You know, people say how often? Never more than 5,000. If you're tracking this thing, driving it hard, I'd say 3,000.
So when you got to do a rod bearing job, how do you even get to that? Because it's under the engine, it's kind of weird. How do we even get to the point where we can take the rod bearings out?
Well, the first couple steps are actually pretty easy. It's taking your spark plugs out, taking your air box out.
What was that?
That was me going like this. We're gonna wish it out and it's gone. Taking your dipstick out, and then you're pretty much done from the top end. You're gonna go down below, take a couple other parts out, but before you even lift the car up, it's a good idea to get this engine cradle in place. And this is what's actually gonna keep your motor from falling on top of you when you're working from below. So go over to the lift, we'll bring it up, and I'll show you what's going on below.
What are you doing?
Way back, baby.
What's that?
It's a burger joint, man, where they got the bomb-ass burgers with the bomb-ass cheese.
That's Sean. He's the service manager at AE and also likes cheese.
I love cheese. Cheese is the bomb. We're gonna put cheese on these fucking rod bearings in a minute. Secret ingredient.
That's the secret
Don't tell
ingredient.
anyone.
So now that we've got the car in the air, motor supported from above with that nice strong engine cradle, now we can start taking apart all the stuff from below. So first you unbolt your motor mounts, you're going to unbolt a couple of your control arms, and then from there you can lower your subframe down. Now once the subframe's out of the way, you have full access to your oil pan and everything you need to access to do the rod bearing job. Now before we can actually pull the pan off, there's a couple other small things. There's the power steering pump we have to push to the side. There's a steering column we have to undo and push to the side as well. Once all that's out of the way, which is relatively quick, then we can get right into pulling the oil pan off and getting into the bearings.
What would this be like, do you think, doing it in the driveway?
You know, it's funny you should ask. I'll actually show you. It's a pain in the ass.
All right, so I'm already looking at this. This still looks pretty high.
That's a pretty high jack stand you need, but honestly it needs to be that high. I mean, look how low your subframe's hanging. You gotta be under that.
Right. So now we're here in driveway to simulate the driveway situation. Emil, how we doing in there?
Oh, like, can you get me a shop rag? I dropped more oil in my face. This is awful.
Emil, what do you think, man? Can you show me like what it's like to actually take a bearing out and put one in?
Yeah, I'm about to do number 4 right now, so I'll show you how we do it from beginning to end.
All right, let's do it.
So here's bearing number 4, and you can see it's kind of out of alignment, so it's gonna be kind of tricky to do anything when it's looking like this. So we're gonna spin the crankshaft. Here we go.
Wow.
Yeah, imagine that doing 8,000 times per minute. That's
Yeah,
what
really.
it normally does.
That's insane.
So there we go. Now we've got the connecting rod kind of right in the middle. Right in the middle of the engine block there. Now we can reach around and get the bearing shells out nice and easily. And we're gonna break free these bolts here.
Let's do it.
It's always nice to break them free evenly. You don't want to fully loosen one and then keep the other super tight, so kind of walk them off like that. Now they're both loose.
Okay.
Now we basically just unscrew these fully. And these are the bolts you don't use again, so we're going to be putting new hardware in.
You're just chucking those?
Just chucking those.
Got it.
This is where you want to start being a little delicate. We've got 2 bolts fully loose now, so I'm actually going to put my thumb on the bottom half of that connecting rod so it doesn't fall out. If that falls out, that's not a good day.
What happens if it falls out?
It risks, going on the floor and maybe putting a ding in, some surface you don't want a ding on.
Got it.
Sometimes these fall right out, sometimes they are actually stuck on there pretty good. So far they've been pretty stuck, so I actually got to take this rag here, grab the lower shell, wiggle it off. So there's your bottom half.
Let's see it.
So this one doesn't actually look too bad here. Get some light on it.
Yeah. Oh wow, yeah.
Yeah, so this one doesn't actually look too bad. So I'll put this one aside. We'll start cleaning this one momentarily.
Okay.
Now, next step we got to do, we have to kind of grab the connecting rod, which is right here, and we're going to have to push this up. Now, if you didn't take your spark plugs out, this is going to be nearly impossible.
Okay.
Because you're going to be fighting compression and combustion,
Oh, so literally right now you're pushing air out of the cylinder.
I'm pushing air out of the cylinder, correct.
Got it, got it.
So once you've pushed it up, maybe an inch, maybe 2 inches, something like that, just enough where the connecting rod can now swing past the crankshaft. So now, see, here's your connecting rod, just nice and loose. You can reach the bearing shell. And here's where it gets a little tricky. You almost have to get 2 hands in there and pop that shell, that bearing shell, out of there. Very gently.
Wow.
And here's cylinder number 3. This one's not as bad as some of the others we've seen. You can see some copper coming through on this wear line here. So that's likely some kind of contaminant that's been stuck in the oil, whether it's a piece of metal from the engine, maybe some sand, or a sloppy oil change in the past. Something got into the oil and made that wear mark.
What's going on here?
There's more oil.
I heard that Motool's coming out with a new moisturizer cream. Is that what we got going on here? Beta testing?
Hopefully it gets rid of wrinkles. So now we're back over on the workbench. We've got the lower bearing on cylinder number 4. And unlike the one that was in the car, this one's a little bit easier to reach, take apart, because you can reach everything. So what I do there is, it's all together like this, right? And you kind of just spin these out very gently, so you can grab it on the side. Now it's broken free. Just kind of pop it straight up like that. So I'd say one of the most important parts in doing rod bearing jobs in general is just cleanliness and getting rid of debris and oil. So when you're putting everything back together, it's nice and clean. So I've got a little bit of Scotch Brite pad here. Got a little bit of brake clean on it. I'm just going to get rid of some of these oil stains, some of this, whatever has been, left over from the old bearing. Just kind of clean it up a little bit. Now, I don't know if there's a proper technique for this, but this is what I like to do. You really don't want to risk any damage to this edge here, because this is, I don't know if the camera's going to pick that up, but these are fractured rods. So this has not been machine cut. This has actually been, I believe it's cryogenically frozen and then fractured via an impact here.
Really?
So the whole theory behind that is you have all these small little surfaces in those fractures that made up to the receiving fractures, and that gives you a lot more surface area, a lot more strength between this and the actual connecting rod. So it makes a stronger component. Unfortunately, you have to be pretty careful. You don't want to squish or nick any of these little crevices and cracks and stuff, because then it's not going to go back together correctly. So whenever I clean these bearing shells like this, I always try to start in the middle and wipe out. You don't want to get the top of this and kind of damage any of this surface area here. So just starting in the middle, wiping up, wiping out. That's about all you want to do. You don't have to go crazy. There's still some discoloration there, but we've got rid of some of the material that's been left behind. Now what you want to do is just really get this clean and oil free. That's soaking it in brake clean. Quick wipe down some of that extra. Again, I'm doing that start in the middle and go out kind of motion. So light dab there. Get rid of anything that was left behind. Now that's ready to receive a new bearing shell. We've got two here. We've got our blue mark, our red mark.
What's the significance of that?
For these later cars, they're actually specified top and bottom. So these blue ones, these are going to go on the top connecting rod. So this red one is the one we're going to install in this lower shell here.
Got it.
These have a little nick, a little tab here. So they only go in one way. And that goes right in there. Pretty self-explanatory. I'd say the most self-explanatory part of this process.
So tab in the little hole thing?
Yep, and I always start with the tab, you know, kind of like that. Kind of ready to go, it's lined up. And then with these, you kind of want to push this in as you push it down so you don't scrape any material off the back getting stuck in those little cracks and crevices that we discussed earlier.
Got it.
And if you can put your thumb there to keep that in place, push in and down, there you go. You may have moved a little bit like this. See how this side's higher than this side now? Let's take our fingernail, gently realign that a little bit better. So there, now it's pretty flush side to side, and that's ready to be installed in the car.
All right, so now you got some red stuff on there. What's going on here?
This is red line assembly lube. Theory behind this is when you first start cranking your motor over, after you've replaced all your bearings, you've got no oil in there. You've got no oil flow. So this gives you that momentary protection on first startup, so you're not damaging your new bearings. As soon as oil pressure builds and starts flowing, this stuff just gets washed away, and you know, see you later on your next oil change.
All right, so now we're putting this back in. What do we got going on?
Yep, so now we're getting ready to put the upper bearing shell into the connecting rod.
The blue one.
The blue one. And these are a lot trickier to do when they're in the car. You have very little space, be very precise. That one went in pretty smooth though. I'm happy with that, how that's sitting.
Are they usually a pain?
It is probably the most painstaking part of this process. It's because how little room you have to work with, and you're kind of manipulating this bearing with just your fingertips. You know, positioning it, clipping it into place, making sure you're not scratching anything critical. It's very precise, meticulous work you need to be cautious of. We're going to do the same thing we did with the bottom half, is just put a little bit of that red line assembly lube in there. Now, everyone does these differently, but I don't like to use too much of this. I like to just apply this stuff kind of in the center of the bearing, leaving these edges open like this. Because as these bearings smush together when you're reassembling the two halves, that assembly lube is going to kind of creep around. And if you put too much in there, it can actually get in between the two halves of the connecting rod. I don't know what that really does. I prefer it's not there, so I'm just going to keep going by that practice. Cleaner is better.
Cleaner is always better.
All right. We've got the assembly lube in place now. We're going to swing the connecting rod back over on top of the crankshaft here. Let's get a visual look. It's pretty straight. So now we're going to slowly draw it back down by pulling both sides. You want to do this slow, and you don't want to nick anything on the way down. Once you get to a certain point, it kind of falls into correct placement. I don't know if you could hear that, but that was the rod just popping nicely into place, nicely seated.
That was a little pop. It just kind of seated itself.
Yep. That's in place. You know, we're kind of touching it with oily fingers. So let's take a look at our mating surfaces here on the fracture joint.
One sec.
I don't see any oil stains from my fingers, so I'm not going to put any more brake clean on that or clean it up anymore. I'm going to get ready to put the lower shell on. Like I mentioned earlier, these rods are fractured, so they can only go on one way. This way or this way. Imperative you put them on the right way, because if you put them in the wrong way, all those little cracks and crevices are going to get smushed and this thing's never going to go back right. So you can look at the cracks and kind of visualize which one goes where. Telltale way, foolproof way, no writing here. And you've got some text here, some numbers and stuff. So these numbers are going to be on the same side on the connecting rod.
Here, hold that towards me. I can't.
You gotta probably have just the right light. There's some numbers there.
Yeah, hold it a little bit down. Yeah, right there. I see it. 320. Cool.
Don't know if you can tell, but yep, here are your numbers right here on this side of the connecting rod. So the numbers we've got here, they're going to go on this side. There we go. We've got that placed. We have our pre-lubricated ARP rod bolts. Get one going here. Get it fully seated so the shell's not flopping around. There we go. And we've got those hand tight. And I always just like to take a quick look at my fracture line there between the rod and the bearing end. Yeah, it looks like it's all smushing together nice. We got that nice.
Smushing is a part of ideal part of this process, huh?
Smushing is critical. So with that assembly lube in place, we only need to do one pass of torquing these bolts, which is going to be 50 foot-pounds. And same concept as taking them apart and putting them together. You kind of want to walk these down. So you don't want to go right to 50 foot-pounds on one and have the other at 0. And bring them down evenly and gently. Starting to feel pretty even now. It's kind of all by feel. Now we're going to go to our 50 foot-pounds. There we go, there's one. There's two.
And that's it?
That's almost it.
Okay.
Icing on the cake. Got a little wipe. And a Sharpie. Big old check mark. That one's done.
Got it. Let me see this check. Got it. So you check them off as you go.
Check them off as I go.
Cool.
Obviously you can tell because the ARP bolts look different than factory. But, you know, just peace of mind. I've torqued that one. I know it's all done. It's lubricated. It's torqued. It's done. I'm going to check on it.
That's kind of like your signature.
Yeah.
If you put like an E instead of a check.
Little smiley face on everyone.
Now is the moment of truth. Let's see how bad those old rod bearings are and see how close this thing was to spinning a bearing.
All right, so I left Emil about an hour ago, and I'm gonna go check on him to see how we're doing with the rod bearing job. I think we're pretty much done, but let's see. Oh, I see him right here. Emil, what do we got, buddy?
Well, cylinder 5 was pretty bad.
Yeah?
The rest, kind of 50-50. You know, they're a little bit worn. They're kind of okay.
Let's see it.
But yeah, here's what we got going on. So number 5, this is the top one. All the way down into the copper layer.
Yeah, wow.
So all these layers of lead and other metals, they're just all gone. The rest, not as bad. Some of them have definitely gone through a couple layers like we see there. Some of them had some weird scoring. Looks like almost maybe some debris was stuck in there. Maybe sand, maybe metal elsewhere from the engine that got stuck in the bearings and just slowly wore away.
So
big question though, was this a ticking time bomb?
yeah, how close were we to blowing up?
It's tough to say. Number 5 was definitely pretty bad. Could it have let go? Absolutely. When? It's kind of up in the air. If this is an aggressive driver with a lot of track days, a lot of maybe cold weather climate driving where the oil doesn't warm up enough quickly. Those can all take into effect it going. It's really how each driver treats their car.
Cut.
Moral of the story, change your oil every 5,000 miles and do your rod bearings every 60,000 miles. That's it.
If you like this video, hit that subscribe button. What else, Emil?
Like, share, comment, let the world know.
That's it, guys. We'll see you in the next video here at Auto Engineering in Lexington. Check you soon.